Later that day. A while later, they sat in the driveway, the house looming ahead of them. "Eric, I feel funny about this," Jessie said, not taking her eyes from the pillars in the dark windows. "Me too, kid. Me too. The last time I was here, the only time for that matter." Eric shuddered, thinking back on the gore. So much blood, he thought. "Well, let's get on with it," he said, putting his car in gear and pulling up to the house. They entered through the back door and were instantly assailed by the pungent odor of strong cleaner. Eric looked around, impressed. It was a large room, a thoroughly modern kitchen at one end, with tiled counter and professional-looking stainless steel range. The far wall was dominated by a fieldstone fireplace. A simple table and chairs, 2 cots, and a footlocker were all sat in between. Jessie followed his gaze. "They did this room first, Sean and Jack. They said it was the easiest to redo. The kitchen things were all new," she explained. "And the fireplace was the only one in good shape. Usable, I mean. He had to get the other ones rebuilt. I noticed the scaffolding around them," Eric volunteered. "Sean said it would be easier to live in this one room while taking time to redo the rest of the place the right way. It had a place to cook and the fireplace for warmth. The nights were still pretty chilly when he moved in." Yeah, he was one tough one, all right. Nothing fazed him when he put his mind to it, Eric lamented. Jessie watched him looking around the room. "You know, you look like him." Eric gawked, looking at her in surprise. "That's a first." "I didn't think so at first. He was taller, grayer, and, not as thin up here." She made an embarrassed face and indicated Eric's receding hairline. "Thanks a lot," Eric said sarcastically. "I didn't mean anything by it. Sorry." "Oh, you know it's true." "Yeah, I'm sorry. No offense taken." "That's okay, but watching you look around, I see the resemblance now. You're different, not as hard-looking, but I see it now." "Thank you, I think," Eric said, smiling. "I think you're pretty yourself. For a kid, that is." Jessie's face reddened, and she stomped her foot. "I'm not a kid. I wish you'd stop saying that. I'm free, white, over 18, and I'm going to college," she said defiantly. Okay. Still, you couldn't be more than a couple or 3 years older than my daughter, which makes me old enough to be your father. Almost. That, my dear, makes you a kid. God, would you listen to us?" she smiled. Eric chuckled too. "Truce?" "Agreed." "Okay, now where's this proof of yours?" Eric asked, turning serious. "Right this way, sir, I think." She led him through a large doorway. To the right was the living room. To the left a dining room, he guessed. Both had fireplaces, he noticed, thinking. Nice place. Ahead of them was the foyer, the front door gone, but boarded shut. Jessie led him to the stairs and started up, then looked back at Eric just standing there. Then she noticed the splintered wood on the steps and the pocket-marked wall, and remembered the room upstairs. "Oh," was all she said, realizing his hesitation. She had been told he had arrived before the bodies had been moved, and had identified Sean then and there. "Which one?" she asked, not wanting to know, but intensely curious for some macabre reason. Eric looked at her, his eyes pleading, not wanting to answer. "Which one?" she asked again, her voice stronger and demanding. "Your mother," Eric answered, lowering his eyes to the floor. "I think she was answering the door, and they fired through it." He indicated the boarded area over the main entrance. "Oh," she said again, fighting back a tear. Then she turned and strode purposefully up the stairs. Eric followed Jessie up the steps. She stopped before the doorway to the bedroom, taking in the walls marked with a shotgun blast as well. Eric stopped just behind her, trying to hold his emotions in check. His chest tightened, and he thought his heart would just stop. "Sean?" she asked in a soft, sympathetic tone. Eric nodded quickly, unable to speak for fear of breaking down. She reached out and grasped his fingers, and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Their eyes met, and they shared each other's pain for a long moment. She broke away and stepped into the battle-scarred bedroom. Eric followed her in, looking around. I hadn't seen any of this, he said, gesturing toward the bullet-scarred walls with a wave. She shook her head. These are from the war. Eric looked at her, confused. The Civil War, when the gold was hidden. Jessie ignored Eric's disbelieving looks and knelt to try to locate the hiding place. What are you looking for? Eric asked, looking over her shoulder. Your brother and Jack were trying to run some wiring through there for the downstairs ceiling fixtures when they came across this old hiding place under a loose board. Myra used to hide her diary and things in there. We came to the conclusion that after her lover was killed here, she left the room, kind of like a shrine to him, diary and all, still there. She started a new one, picking up from where that one left off. She used to write everything down. Her whole life was in a series of diaries from when she was a little girl till just before she died. Anyway, we found it in here first, she said with a triumphant smile as she located the loose floorboard. The treasure map? Eric asked, smirking. Yes, she nodded, amongst other things, including a bar of gold bullion. Just then, Jessie freed the board and looked down inside and sat on her heels smiling smugly. Eric looked over her shoulder, and his jaw dropped. There, sitting under the loose floorboard, was a single, gleaming bar of gold. Holy shit! Is it real? Eric blurted, stunned. As far as we knew it was. We had no reason to question it, considering the notes we found. You think this had anything to do with what happened? Eric knelt beside her and reached in, lifting the heavy bar before answering. Phew! He whistled. I bet my life on it, kid. People have been killing each other over this shit for centuries. But who? She demanded. What are you asking me for? You're the one who's known about it since they, found it and all. I don't know. She pouted, hugging herself. Eric looked away from the gold to look at her, and instantly regretted his last statement. She looked so innocent and vulnerable. Like a little girl, he thought. Look, I'm sorry, he consoled her. I didn't mean to sound like a callous asshole. I know you're hurting. God knows I am. I just wasn't thinking. It's okay, she sputtered, wiping away a tear that had leaked out and was running down her cheek. Who could do this? She sobbed, breaking down, crying into her hands. First Mama, and Sean, then the house. I can't take it. She shook as she cried harder. Wait a minute, you're losing me. What about your house? Eric asked, baffled. Oh, when I got back from doing my research Friday, the day, I got home to find the house where Mama and I lived, all torn apart. I was so scared. Then the sheriff arrived with my grandparents and told me about Mama. Eric moved forward to comfort her. She went willingly into his arms and sobbed uncontrollably. For a while, I was numb, but now, I'm scared again, she managed between sobs. You poor thing, Eric said, holding her tighter. Did you tell the sheriff? She shook her head no, keeping it buried in his chest. Not at first, anyway, she said after a long moment. Something told me not to. I told him today about everything, but that... She indicated the gleaming bar of gold Eric had dumped aside when he moved to hold her. Did he believe you? Eric asked, trying to look down at her face. She shook her head again, and Eric became aware for the first time how fresh and natural her scent was. What a time to notice a thing like that, he thought, chiding himself, breathing in deeply, taking it all in. No more than you did, she said, sitting back and trying to compose herself. And then she went on. He said the map was more than likely a fake, that the whole Mosby's gold legend was just unfounded myth, and he was surprised someone as smart as my mama was taken in by all the foolishness, especially after what had happened before. Eric held up his hand for her to stop. You're losing me again. What happened? Jessie sighed. It's a long story, but okay, here's the short version. Uncle Charlie, he's not really my uncle, we just call him that. Anyway, he studied the legend high and low, knew everything there was to know about every version of the story. He was convinced the whole thing was true. He studied the Civil War closely and was actively hunting for the gold, trying to figure out what had happened. Anyway, he told stories about it and looked for it for years, as my Uncle Bobby, my real uncle, Mama's younger brother, As he grew up, he became a local war buff too, and for a while he helped Uncle Charlie. Then for some reason, he changed his mind about it, but led Uncle Charlie on a wild goose chase. Had him believing a ghost roaming the countryside would lead him to the gold. But Uncle Bobby set the whole thing up, and made Uncle Charlie look the fool. Uncle Charlie tried to bring charges against Uncle Bob and his friends that had helped, but the sheriff and the judge said they couldn't charge them for making an old fool look foolish. Anyway, Jesse sighed again. If Mama and Sean were digging at things, and folks thought the gold was real, well, crazy people do crazy things anymore, child. That's what he said. She finished, getting to her feet and looking down at the gleaming metal. Kind of hypnotizes you, doesn't it? Yeah, Eric replied, following her gaze. It does at that. Do you have any idea where the map might be? Eric asked. No. Jessie sighed, her shoulders sagging. Jack might know, she said, suddenly brightening at the idea. Then her brow furrowed as a thought struck her. Hey, where is Jack anyway? You mean Jack Braggs from the marina? Eric asked, making sure they were talking about the same person. Yes, silly, Jessie chuckled. He was here near every week, at least a couple of days at a time, helping Sean with the house. Didn't he tell you? Eric shrugged. Yeah, I guess he mentioned it, like he had been up there once to help. You say it was more often? Jessie nodded vigorously. He was here almost constantly. I was surprised when he left last week. Did he know about the gold? Eric asked. Sure, all of us knew. I was also surprised he wasn't at the funeral, she added. Eric shrugged. I couldn't get a hold of him. Never got an answer at the marina. Eric's brow furrowed in thought. He didn't especially like what he was thinking, but it added up. No, he couldn't be, Eric thought. I've known Jack a long time. He and Sean were tight. He couldn't have. He made a mental note to himself to try and call Jack as soon as possible. Oh, Jessie said, falling deep into her own thoughts. Eric could tell by her explanation they were thinking the same thing. She suddenly looked up into Eric's eyes, and he noticed for the first time how bright green they were. You don't think Jack, She couldn't finish. No, Eric shook his head. I don't think so. Anyway, Jack's never been the greedy sort, and he thought of Sean almost like a son. They lapsed into an uncomfortable silence. I think we should tell the sheriff about this. Eric indicated the gold on the floor. Why? He doesn't believe it anyway. I didn't either, but this sort of proves it. You know what I mean? Sean said we shouldn't tell anybody, Jessie warned. He said gold makes people do strange things. And look what happened to him. I know what happened to my brother. I don't need you to remind me. Her tears started again. Christ, don't do that, Eric chided. I'm sorry. He apologized and then looked away, embarrassed. I'm scared all of a sudden. Everything's different. Something's going on. If Jack didn't do it, what if something happened to him? I'd be the only one left of the four of us who saw the gold and the map. Jessie shuddered. You're forgetting I've seen the gold too, Eric added, trying to reassure her. But you haven't seen the map. Well, then think. Where would Sean have hidden it? Where did you see it last? Think. Jessie closed her eyes tightly and looked for all the world like she was thinking as hard as she could. The last place I saw it was downstairs, the day before Sean went on his business trip, right after the break-in. Eric held up her hand for her to stop. Wait a minute. You're losing me again. What break-in is this? The one here. You mean there was a break-in here before they were killed? Eric stated in disbelief. Yeah, she nodded. When? A week ago, after we had Sunday dinner, we came out here with Granddaddy, Uncle Bobby, and Uncle Charlie to show them the place, and let them see some of the antiques in the tent. When we got here, there were all kinds of alarms going off in the tent and in the house. Sean had alarms and motion detectors in the house and the tent. He borrowed them from the security company he worked for. There weren't any alarms when we came in, Eric stated, but I guess that makes sense. I wouldn't know how to shut them off anyway. Eric got up quickly to his feet, picked up the gold bar, and headed out of the room. Where are you going? Jessie asked, scurrying to follow. Downstairs. First I'm going to try and call Jack. See if he verifies what you said and ask him if he has any idea where Sean hid the map. Second, I'm going to look for the map and see if we can't figure this shit out. How are you going to find it? Let's just say I know my brother. Plus, he gave me some pointers on where to look for things and where to hide them. Eric went into the kitchen and prowled around looking while Jesse looked on. Can I call my grandmother and granddaddy so they don't worry, please? Sure, although I've got no idea where the phone is. That's okay, I do. She smiled as she went to the footlocker by the bed and opened it, pulling Sean's compact cellular phone out of the top tray. Eric, over here, she called, motioning to him. He walked to her, and she pointed down at the footlocker, then dialed her grandparents' home, explaining, I've been staying with them since Mama, well, you know. Eric looked down at the footlocker. There, in the tray, were pictures and the note Wilt had written. Eric looked at the pictures of the couple by the well, and the one of Wilt in his uniform. While he read the note, he looked further, but no map. He stared at the picture, trying to imagine these two people in real life. Jesse finished with the phone and sighed. Granddaddy doesn't sound good at all. He said my grandmama's been in bed since they got back from the funeral. It was just before your brother's. I just stayed till they were done with Mama and waited to watch Sean's from a distance. Anyway, he said there's a house full of people. Could you run me there or back to the funeral home so I can get the car? I sure would appreciate it. No sweat. Let me try and call Jack before we go. Jesse handed the phone to Eric, and he dialed the Marina's phone number from memory. Eric waited. He let it ring a dozen times. Hell of a way to run a business, he said, tossing the phone on the cot. Let's go, he said, heading for the door. I got an idea, Jesse said as they headed to the door. Eric picked up the glass with the note, the pictures, and the gold bar. What's that? He said, trying to balance his load. What on earth are you doing? She questioned. Taking it with us. What's it look like? I want to keep an eye on it. Eric grunted. What's your idea? Get the door, would you please? Well, you need to eat, and there's going to be a mountain of food. Why don't you stay at my grandparents' for a while? Relax and have some food. I know you don't know anyone local, and my family was fond of your brother. And you were supposed to take Easter dinner with us yesterday. I don't know. I don't feel much like eating, Eric said, half-heartedly. Please? She asked, opening the door and moving so he could pass through with his awkward burden. Jesse locked the door behind her and followed Eric to his car, where he arranged the glass on the back seat and put the gold bar on the rear floor, sliding it under the seat. Eric, are you out of your mind? Jesse blurted. What? Eric replied, distracted. Have you gone crazy? Cuckoo? Loco, you know? Jesse said as her jaw dropped. You're just gonna put $150,000 of gold bullion under your seat? Yeah, why not? Who'd guess? Plus, I don't want to leave it on the seat. That's too obvious, don't you think? She shook her head as they climbed in. Eric turned the key, the engine rumbled to life, and they sped off towards her grandparents' house. Outside Warrenton, Virginia. Eric stood awkwardly, balancing a plastic plate in one hand while trying to eat a thick ham sandwich with the other. He stood apart from most of the people gathered, feeling a little awkward about that too. He knew absolutely no one, but Jesse and he felt as if everyone were staring at him, thinking, if it hadn't been for his brother, dear Abby would still be with us. Eric knew he was being paranoid. Everyone had been nothing, if not gracious, polite, and even sympathetic towards his own pain, given none of them knew Sean. Eric thought of his brother. It still didn't seem possible. Of course, everything that had happened didn't seem possible. Eric still felt as if his head was spinning. What would Sean do, he thought? Would he tell the police about the gold and sit back? No, not Sean. He'd find the gold himself, and he'd use it to bait the killer. But Eric realized he wasn't Sean. That kind of thing might be right up Sean's alley, but not his. He wasn't a hero. Something Sean always said to him came to him just then. If you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you can't make it, you won't. Only by starting a journey will you ever arrive at your destination. At that time it seemed like so much horseshit to Eric. But now, it was starting to make sense. When he started running, he thought doing a mile was gonna kill him. Now he was doing 5. Sean had coached him back from the land of the couch potatoes. But Eric had worked. had listened to his brother, and had bettered himself. Was he going to quit now just because Sean was gone? Because all of a sudden things had gotten tougher? No. He was going to keep living his life by his brother's axioms. Sean had lived a full, satisfying life, and Eric had always idolized him. Why not keep his memory strong by making him proud and doing things in a way Sean would be proud of? Eric was standing before a large stone fireplace in the Daltons' living room, staring off into the distance. He was startled when a large hand patted him on the shoulder. "These are something, aren't they?" Cyrus Dalton said with pride. It took Eric a moment to realize Cyrus thought he was admiring two large, ornate trophies resting on the mantel. Not wanting to be rude, Eric just agreed with him. Then, when looking at them closely in earnest, he realized for the first time they were national match shooting trophies. "Do you shoot traps, Mr. Murphy?" Cyrus asked, working himself to tell the tale of the two trophies. "No," Eric replied honestly, "but it always looked like fun. My brother Sean was the one that was into guns. I just do a little hunting now and then." Cyrus grunted. "We all shoot. Everyone, that is, but Abby." The mention of Abby's name brought Cyrus up short, his emotions almost overwhelming him. But after a moment of thoughtful pain, he continued. "Well, anyway, we all shoot. Those ones that are mine. The others are Elizabeth's from a long time back before the kids was born. That's how Elizabeth and I met. At trap shoots." He continued, warming to his tale. "Me and Charlie used to hit the trap shoots every chance we got. Charlie was mighty fine shooter himself. Only time I ever did beat him was that day. Bobby, he shoots, but he don't take it seriously. Does it half-assed. Pretty much how he does most things, come to think on it. But Abby, God rest her soul, didn't want nothing to do with it. Elizabeth and I still go out and drop a few pigeons from time to time. Charlie, too." Cyrus paused, shaking his large head sadly. "How is your wife taking it?" Eric asked as delicately as possible. "Elizabeth?" Cyrus grunted. "Not well at all. We had to sedate her. She's resting upstairs now, finally. Hit her real hard. Kept muttering in her sleep the other night how it's all her fault. Hell, how could she have known something was gonna happen? You can't see the future." Cyrus gave Eric a conspiratorial look. "Come on, my boy. We need our own sedation." Cyrus turned and motioned Eric to follow. He led him out of the house by way of the side door, skirting several knots of well-wishers visiting in the yard. Cyrus led Eric to the antique shop up by the road. They entered through the back door. Eric looked around and wandered through the shop while Cyrus went to the cabinet in the corner. He opened it and produced a bottle and 2 glasses. Eric wandered his way as he poured 3 fingers of the amber liquid into each glass and handed one to Eric, who gratefully accepted it. Cyrus held his glass up for a toast. Eric also raised his. "To loved ones lost, who are never more. May someday we meet again on that distant shore." With that, Cyrus threw back his drink. "Ah, that hit the spot," he said, wiping his mouth, pouring another. Meanwhile, Eric tried the same thing. Eric's eyes bulged as the liquid seemed to explode when it hit his stomach. He choked and coughed, but he got it down. "Jesus Christ," he said, breathing deeply. "Oh, what was that shit?" Cyrus smiled and chuckled as he took Eric's glass and refilled it. When he handed it back to him, he explained. "Rye whiskey. Heard one time it was old Honest Abe's favorite brand of whiskey, you see. And I figure if he got up to snootin' full one night, woke up the next morning and asked, 'I freed who?' Well," Cyrus paused for effect and chuckled. "Well, I thought I gotta try me some of that, even if old Abe was a Yankee." Cyrus laughed at his joke. Eric chuckled politely and smelled the contents of his glass and made a sour face. "It smells awful," Eric commented. "Yes, it does, boy. Yes, it does. But it sure gets the job done. Drink up." They both tossed their drinks back, Eric handling it better than the first time. Now he knew what to expect. "That wasn't so bad that time," he commented. Cyrus just chuckled and filled the glasses. "This one we sip," he suggested, handing Eric back his refill. "Nice place you got here." Eric waved around, indicating the shop. Cyrus shrugged. It's a decent living. Kind of up and down, though. I've got some nice pieces in here now, but the market's kinda iffy. Summer does better. Hell, one winter and spring a couple years back, the only thing I sold were mini balls from the war. Excuse me? Eric asked. Bullets from the Civil War were called mini balls. At $1 a pop, I must have sold 10,000 of them if I sold one. Fed us all winter that year. Cyrus shook his head at the memory. Just then the door opened, and another older man stepped into the shop. Might have known I'd find you in here, Cyrus. Y'all nipping at the sauce if I guessing right? Cyrus waved and called, Come on in, Charles. Charles, this here's Eric Murphy. You know, Sean's brother. Eric, this is Uncle Charlie. Call him that. Everyone else does. Cyrus said by way of introduction. My dear boy, my deepest sympathies. It's a terrible thing. Abby and your brother. A terrible thing. Cyrus, how about pouring me some of that rock gut you call whiskey? Charlie said, shaking hands with Eric and nodding towards the bottle with his head. Have the police or sheriff learned anything? Do you know? He asked Eric, showing his concern, his eyebrows arcing intently and resting a sympathetic hand on Eric's shoulder. No, I don't think so, Eric replied soberly, but they do have someone in custody. They do? Uncle Charlie gasped, his surprise obvious. Good. I hope they hang the son of a bitch. Eric nodded, adding, Yeah, but I don't know. It's all pretty circumstantial. Slowly, Cyrus snarled and handed Charlie his drink. Another toast, Cyrus called, holding his glass high. To the son of a bitch who murdered Sean and my Abby. May he die a painful death and rot in hell. Hear, hear, Charlie seconded. Cyrus and Charlie tossed down their whole drink. Eric sipped his, already feeling the effects of the first two. Charlie held his glass out to Cyrus for a refill. You know, Eric, I only ever met your brother once, but he seemed a fine fellow. Thank you, Eric replied simply, trying to keep his emotions neutral, lest he break down and embarrass himself in front of people he hardly knew. You also bought a couple fine pieces from him for a steal, Cyrus added. By the way, Charlie, you did pay Sean, didn't you? Charlie gave Cyrus a dark look. As a matter of fact, I didn't. Not yet, anyway. I was waiting for him to get back in town. Now I don't know where I'd send the money. I suppose young Eric here? Eric was lost. I don't know yet. I have to call and set up a meeting tomorrow. His will and insurance was all done through the company he worked for. Eric trailed off. Ah, I see, Charlie answered, feigning interest. I wouldn't worry about it. Uncle Charlie? There's no hurry, Eric soothed. Is there anybody else? Uncle Charlie asked. No, just me. My parents are both gone. My mom when I was a kid, and my dad just last year. Now Sean. No, it's just me now. Eric managed to keep a tight rein on his emotions. So much is going on, it's hard to keep everything straight. Eric volunteered without really meaning to. I mean, my dad was sick for a long time. I had to take care of him. Then when he died, Sean was overseas for Desert Storm. I didn't know if he had been told or when. Hell, I didn't even know if he was alive or dead. Then a year later he pops up out of the Navy, retired. We patched things up. We talked all the time on the phone, you know. We were closer than ever. Now this. Eric shook his head sadly and tossed his drink down. It's a shock to us all, Charlie soothed. Hear, hear. Cyrus seconded, filling the glasses again. Yeah, but it's different, I guess. Sean went in the Navy when I was a kid. He spent what seemed like his whole 20 years in combat. You know, Vietnam, Central America, Grenada, and the Middle East. The whole time the family was on edge thinking any day we would just get the dreadful family visit. Now all of a sudden, bam! Just when I was starting to think of him as being back. Now he's taken away for good. Life does seem unjust at times. We must endure disappointments, setbacks, and inevitable tragedies. Charlie intoned. But alas, it's still a shame two such beautiful people. Tick tick. All over a silly myth. How's that? Eric sputtered, newly interested in the conversation. Well, it's no secret. You mean you don't know? Incredible. Ah, Charlie, do we have to get into this? Cyrus chided. I assure you, Cyrus, I ain't getting into anything. Into what? Eric asked. Well, it's no secret. Charlie glowered at his old friend, then turned to Eric, his tone getting conspiratorial. There's this old local legend about Mosby's gold. It dates back to the Civil War. Without getting into a lot of detail, I told your brother about this legend at the dinner table just weeks before. Well, you know. Eric nodded that he did. Charlie continued talking in even lower tones. Then last week, Abby called and contacted every historian, noted Civil War buff who knows anything about the 43rd Battalion, better known as Mosby's Rangers. And naturally, they all referred her back to me. Anyway, they found something at your brother's house to cause all this activity, I'm sure of it. Most people just don't believe the legend, although most legends some way are usually founded on truth. Just then the door opened again, and Bobby came in. Eric noted the resemblance between Bobby and Cyrus even before Cyrus introduced them. Beware, conspirators speak in low tones, Bobby said, grinning snidely as he approached. Did you ever find any willing victims for your tall tales, Uncle Charlie? Hush up, boy, and have a drink, Cyrus ordered, pouring another round and twice as much in Bobby's. Hey, what's this? Bobby asked, noticing the brimming glass. Cyrus shrugged. You're behind, Bob. Just don't want you feeling left out. Oh, my manners are slipping. I hope y'all will forgive me. Bob, this is Sean's brother, Eric. Jesse brought him by. This ought to be really interesting then. Do continue, Uncle Charlie. Don't let me interrupt. Robert, sometimes... He left it hang and huffed. Well, I wasn't telling one of my tall tales, as you put it. I was just relaying facts for Eric, since he's just been dumped here in the middle of this mess without a clue. Huh. Bobby barked and downed the brimming tumbler of the amber whiskey. He coughed. Daddy, this stuff is god-awful. Don't listen to this old fool, Bobby said, turning to Eric. He's a bit touched at times, but I assure you he's harmless. Just an old bag of wind. Bobby, Cyrus growled. No, that's all right, Cyrus, Charlie said, glaring at Bobby with hate in his eyes. Time will bear me out on this, I assure you. Then Robert will look the complete fool, not me. He turned to Eric, pleading. Abby spent the last 4 days of her life researching things about this so-called tall tale. He gave a sideways glance to Bobby, who shrugged indifferently. He continued. She's been hearing about all this most her life. She knew the story. Why did she pick now all of a sudden to start believing it? I'll tell you why. They found something. Some missing piece of the puzzle that helps it make sense. If they found something as you suggest, why was my sister researching it? Why not just go dig it up, Uncle? Bobby's smirk was growing to a leering grin as he chuckled. Eric was growing more uncomfortable by the moment. He waited for a break in the growing argument to make his apologies and leave. He didn't want to slip up and give anything away, and he was tempted. He knew the liquor was loosening his tongue. He was starting to feel its full effects. He knew if he didn't leave soon, he was going to get completely polluted. He saw his chance, so he took it. Excuse me, I hate to break up what is turning into such a great party, but Eric got unsteadily to his feet. I'm gonna have to be on my way. Eric shook hands all around and offered his sincerest sympathies to Cyrus and Bobby. He wished they had met under happier circumstances. Before he got to the door, he turned back. They had already forgotten him and were settling back into what seemed to be an ongoing argument. Eric stepped outside, shaking his head to clear it. He should say goodbye to Jessie. He looked around and saw her near the house in a close conversation with a cluster of guests, arm in arm with a large kid, wearing an OSU Letterman's jacket. He felt a funny twinge deep inside, where nothing had stirred for a long time. He shook his head slowly, saying to himself as he turned and headed to his car, Must just be the booze. She's too young for you anyway, Eric, old boy. You won't even be missed if you just slip away now. He took one last glance over his shoulder as he got into the car. He sighed wistfully, then mentally kicked himself for thinking that way. He put the car in gear, heading off to check out of his hotel and spend his first night at his brother's house. He reached under the seat to feel the coolness of the bar of precious metal there reassuringly. "What am I getting into?" he said to no one as he drove off. Wheatland. Eric had somehow managed to navigate the narrow, winding road and arrived at Wheatland. He preferred to call it by its name, now that he knew it had one. It was less personal, and not as painful as thinking of it as Sean's house. The dreams came as soon as he drifted off to sleep. He fell asleep clutching the old photo of Wilt and Myra. As he did, the images came to life for him. He tried to talk to them, but they just laughed at him. Myra giggled daintily while Wilt roared with laughter. Then he was the photographer, taking the picture. When he finished with the picture, he held out his hand demanding payment. Wilt reached into his pocket and pulled out an enormous gold bar and handed it to Eric. The weight threw Eric off balance and he stumbled. Then as he watched, Wilt and Myra turned into Sean and Abby, covered with blood, their wounds gaping. They looked at him, then at each other, and they too began to laugh. When he asked them what was so funny, Abby repeated the words from Wilt's note. "It contains our dreams, and our dreams are in the wishing well. It contains our dreams, and our dreams are in the wishing well." Then Sean laughed too, and pushed him back. Eric lost balance, throwing the gold into the air and fell backward into the well in the picture. He tumbled down, falling seemingly forever. He landed at the bottom, in a pool of rye whiskey. Cyrus, Uncle Charlie, and Bobby were floating there. Cyrus asked Eric if he wanted a drink. Eric reached out to take the glass from Cyrus, and found instead the gold bar in his grasp. The weight threatened to pull him under, and he struggled to climb out. As he reached the top, the gold bar slipped from his grasp. He pulled himself from the well, to find himself in the midst of a battle. Battle-clad soldiers were all around firing on the house. A lone figure in the upstairs window valiantly returned their fire. Eric looked closer and realized it was Wilt. No, Sean firing. And instead of bullets, every time he fired, a gold bar shot from his gun and embedded in the head of a Union soldier. Cyrus, Charlie, and Bobby stood in the midst of this all, arguing about whether the legend of Mosby's gold was true. Myra gaily danced around the yard, pulling the gold bars from the heads of the dead soldiers and tossing them at Eric and chanting into the well. "Our dreams are in the wishing well. Our dreams are in the wishing well." Eric lost his grip and fell yet again, hearing Myra's words echoing off the walls as he fell, this time landing on a pile of gold bullion that Myra had thrown into the well. Eric tried to stand but was attacked by the two goons from his hotel. They pinned him down and beat him and asked him over and over where the gold was. "What's the big deal?" one asked. "You're gonna get $1,000,000 anyhow. Give us the gold or else." $1,000,000 echoed in his head. Eric awoke, sitting up instantly, panting, covered with sweat. "Jesus, was that real?" he said to himself out loud, looking around disoriented, but remembering everything clear as a bell. He looked at the picture in his hand in disbelief. It couldn't be that easy, he said quietly in the dimly lit room. Eric then jumped from the bed and ran outside, being slapped by the chilly night air as he left the warm confines of the house, running helter-skelter around the house, looking for the wishing well. "Where is it?" he shouted into the night as he made his second circuit. Eric went back in and studied the picture again, trying to gain a reference to where the well would be, but nothing was visible but the siding. No windows, no porch, no stone or railing. Eric sighed. Maybe it would be different in the daylight. He looked at his watch. 5:30. Daylight was still an hour or so away. "Shit," he said to the empty room. He sat on the bunk and rubbed his temples. His head was throbbing. "Concentrate, Eric. Concentrate. You've got to think." Damn it, he chided himself. Ring! Eric jumped as the phone rang, startling him. "Jesus!" he gasped, staring at the phone, as it rang a second time. As it started its third ring, Eric snatched it up, answering curtly. "Murphy?" "Ah, Mr. Murphy. Jeff Nelson here. Glad I caught you in," the disembodied voice said. "Do you realize what time it is?" Eric snapped, resenting his caller's smooth, easy tone. "Ah, well, yes," the voice said, unruffled. "I'm sorry if I inconvenienced you, Mr. Murphy. We do get an early start around here, but it is a matter of some importance. Again, I apologize." Aw, hell. That's okay, Eric said, his tone softening, giving into his caller's easy cadence. So what can I do for you, Mr. Nelson? Eric questioned. I think it's more a matter of what I can do for you, Mr. Murphy, or rather, what we can do for each other. He let it hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Mr. Murphy, excuse me, it's Eric, isn't it? May I call you Eric? Knock yourself out, Eric replied. Good. As I was saying, Eric, we have some matters to resolve, and I'm afraid I'm being called out of the country. I would like to resolve our business before I leave. I can have our staff attorney here and all the papers necessary. Could you meet me here in my office at, say, 7:30? It was more of a command than a question. I have no idea where you're located, Eric stalled, not liking the caller's tone. It's not hard to find, I assure you. You're less than an hour away if traffic doesn't interfere. Well, okay. I guess the sooner I get it over with, the better. Give me directions and I'll be there. Eric gave in grudgingly. Splendid. Hold, please. I'll turn you over to my secretary. She'll give you the directions. See you then. When he was done writing down all the directions, Eric had a vague feeling of uneasiness. He stripped down and pulled his sweats from his bag. A good run would help him clear his head, he thought. A good run, it's what Sean would do. Thinking of his brother, Eric stopped and looked around the empty room. What did you get us into, Sean? He said to the empty room. Sighing, he pulled on his shoes and left to start his run. It didn't take Eric long to get his rhythm. The burn felt good after a few days off. He hadn't run since he had been down here. He headed west away from the house. The road had curves and hills and was a pleasant challenge. When he had gone what he judged to be roughly 2.5 miles, he turned back so as to have plenty of time to get ready for his meeting. As he ran, Eric concentrated on putting the facts and the events of the last few days in some kind of order or perspective. What he knew, what he thought, what he had been told. Jesse, everything he knew revolved around Jesse, except for the old legends and crime theories. He wished he could get a hold of Jack to confirm or deny her story. He wanted to believe her, and that bar of gold bullion was proof of some truth, but so much else was cluttering the picture. Eric made a mental note to call Jack when he got back. Topping a hill and starting down a long descending curve, Eric lengthened his stride and picked up his pace. It was nearly daylight now, and a thin sheen of sweat covered Eric, dampening his clothes. It felt good in the chilly morning air. The sky in the east was clear and blue. It promised to be a beautiful day. Honk! Honk! The honk of a horn suddenly blared. Eric snapped his head around, catching a glimpse of an old rust-colored pickup bearing down on him. Instantly, Eric threw himself off the road into the ditch. Damn, that was close, Eric thought, sitting up and trying to pick himself out of the brambles. He craned his neck to get a look at the truck, but it was long gone behind the curve. Eric got nimbly to his feet and brushed himself off. I'd like to get my hands on that son of a bitch, Eric said to the empty road. Didn't even stop. So much for southern hospitality, I guess, Eric said, resuming his run and shaking his head, but feeling lucky all the same. Eric never did quite get his rhythm back, so he kept his pace slower and hugged the edge of the narrow road until he saw the driveway just ahead. An almost familiar rust-colored pickup was sitting just behind his Z in the drive. He quickened his pace, thinking he was going to get a shot at the SOB after all. Eric broke into a full sprint the last 100 yards. As he drew up the driver's side window, a voice full of contempt spoke. About time you got back. What'd you do, walk the whole time? Then the dark face with the angry eyes looked at him. Eric got the feeling they could see right through him. Calhoun? Eric questioned, then realized it was the younger version of his cellmate. Eric moved to pull the snotty youth from behind the wheel when the older, wiser voice spoke up from the passenger's side. Ah, Mr. Murphy, glad you're okay. May I have a word with you? The old man asked, his toothy smile gleaming. Cece continued to taunt him. White man can't jump? Shit, you just proved they can't run neither. Hush, boy, the old man ordered, leveling a stern look at his grandson. Ain't you never heard you're supposed to walk or run against traffic, fool? I said enough. The old man's smile disappeared as he addressed his grandson. Then he beamed brightly as he turned to Eric. Please, Mr. Murphy, It is rather important, he pleaded. Eric looked the 2 generation of Calhouns over a long moment, then said, "Okay, I've got to get ready for an appointment I have. But you can talk while I get ready, I guess." Eric shrugged and headed for the house. The silver-haired patriarch of the Calhoun clan followed steadily. Cece shook his head in disgust. "White people are fucking crazy, just like Granddaddy says," he muttered under his breath, all the while wondering what his granddaddy was doing. "Kiss the white man's ass, and his brother's too. Man's a fool," Cece muttered again as the 2 figures disappeared into the house. "Even if he does have a fine ride," Cece added, taking in the sleek lines of Eric's Z.